A tragic end to the search for a 6-year-old girl who went missing in South Carolina. Good evening, everyone, from the Breaking News Center. I'm Tisha Powell. Faye Swetlik was last seen Monday getting off a school bus in Casey, a suburb of Columbia. 4 days later, her body was found.
Faye was always the first one to give a compliment, or just even randomly to people that she's never met before. Like, we couldn't go anywhere without her stopping at like 3 or 4 different people to compliment them, be it their hair or if the color looked good on them, and she always wanted to make new friends.
On Monday, February 10th, 2020, a child's laughter was silenced. Faye Swetlik, just 6 years old, was doing what every child does best: playing, laughing, singing. A child so full of life, unaware that hours later, she would be gone. Vanished. Without a trace. She had been outside in her own front yard, a place she knew well. But in the blink of an eye, Faye was gone. Her mother, Selena Collins, called out for her, but there was no answer. The hours ticked by, and the realization slowly set in: Faye had disappeared. Who could do this to a little girl? And how is it possible that, in the middle of a quiet neighborhood, no one saw a thing? What happened in those hours? The ones that no one could explain. A community rallying together. A mother's desperate plea. A town on edge, wondering how something like this could happen in their peaceful world. The police combed through every inch of the neighborhood, piecing together what had happened. Still, they found nothing. No sign of Faye. No clue as to where she could be. And no one who could explain how, in a place as safe as this, a child could simply vanish. The search stretched over days. Every moment felt like an eternity. And yet, with each passing hour, the fear grew: what if Faye wasn't coming back? What happened next would shake this entire community to its core. Because when Faye was finally found, it wasn't the ending anyone had hoped for. It wasn't the happy reunion they had prayed for. What police uncovered, what they discovered in the days that followed, would not only leave the town of Casey in disbelief, it would expose an unbelievable truth that no one saw coming. How does a child disappear without a trace? How do you explain the unexplainable? Has your loved one ever disappeared without a notice? The murder of 6-year-old Faye Swetlik. Faye Swetlik was just 6 years old, but her energy and spirit could light up an entire room. She was a young girl full of curiosity, laughter, and life. She was just like any other child, playful, carefree, and brimming with an infectious enthusiasm that made everyone around her smile. Her favorite toy? A well-loved stuffed bunny that she carried with her everywhere, a constant companion in all her adventures. Her hobbies? Simple, yet so full of joy, whether it was running around the yard, playing with her friends, or simply enjoying a good book. Faye was a child who lived fully in every moment, savoring the small things that brought her happiness. Her laughter was a melody everyone could recognize, and her smile, one that could melt even the hardest heart, was a beacon of joy to those who knew her. Faye's life was filled with love, particularly from her mother, Selena Collins Swetlik. A single mother, Selena Collins dedicated herself fully to raising Faye. Their bond was unbreakable, and they shared a closeness that only a mother and daughter can understand. In Faye's eyes, Selena Collins was her whole world. And for Selena, Faye was more than just a daughter, she was her everything. Their little house was a place of warmth, comfort, and security. Faye was a happy child, and nothing in her life seemed out of the ordinary. She loved going to school, making new friends, and looking forward to the adventures that awaited her every day. For Faye, life was a beautiful journey that never seemed to stop moving forward, full of endless possibilities. But the night before February 10th, 2020, there was no way to know that everything would change. For in the blink of an eye, the quiet life Faye and her mother knew would be shattered forever. Faye was just 6. How could someone so small, so full of life, be taken away in an instant? How could something so terrible happen in the middle of a neighborhood that was supposed to be safe? No one could have anticipated what would unfold in the hours that followed. No one could have prepared for the questions that would haunt the community for months to come. Imagine the shock. Imagine the horror that Selena Collins must have felt when, just hours after Faye had stepped outside to play, she vanished without a trace. It wasn't until later that night, as Selena called for her daughter, that the dreadful reality began to sink in. Faye was missing. No one knew where she was, and no one had seen anything. Selena's frantic search turned into something she never expected as time went on. What was once a call for a lost child soon spiraled into the chilling possibility that something bad had occurred. How could Faye simply disappear? And why was no one else in the neighborhood able to provide a clue as to what had happened? This was a mother's worst nightmare, a child lost, without explanation. A community's peaceful existence suddenly interrupted by a question with no answer: what happened to Faye Swetlik? And more terrifying still, could the answer be hidden in plain sight, right in the neighborhood where she had been playing? Over the next few days, the search efforts grew. The neighborhood came together, combing every inch of the streets, hoping to bring Faye home. But as the days turned into nights, the hope began to fade, replaced by the harsh reality that the search was leading nowhere. Little did they know, the truth of Faye's disappearance lay just around the corner. And when the investigators finally got their first real lead, it wasn't the answer anyone expected. Who was responsible for taking Faye? Was it someone from within her own world? Or was it a stranger, someone who had entered the neighborhood with an unimaginable purpose? What if the answers were right there, just waiting to be uncovered? And would the truth come in time to bring Faye home? February 10th, 2020. The day began like any other, peaceful and uneventful. Faye Swetlik, a bright girl, had just finished school. As the school bus pulled away, Faye skipped off, eager to get home, to the comfort of her family, to the routine she knew and loved. The sun was shining, and there was nothing in the air to suggest that in just a few short hours, everything would change forever. At 2:50 p.m., Faye arrived at her front door, waving to the neighbors she passed along the way. She just returned from school. Her day wasn't over yet. Like so many children, Faye loved to play outside, to feel the warmth of the sun and the breeze as she spun around in the yard, pretending to be a princess or a superhero. The world was her playground. By 3:45 p.m., Faye was outside, just like any other day. She was last seen in her front yard, spinning around in circles, her laughter drifting through the air, a sound familiar to those who lived nearby. She was so full of life, so unbothered by the world. It seemed like nothing could go wrong. But as the minutes passed, something started to feel wrong. The laughter faded into the background as the minutes stretched longer. And then, silence. A silence so deep it felt almost unnatural. Faye's mother, Selena Collins, was used to the sounds of her daughter playing in the yard. But when she didn't hear Faye's voice calling out or the familiar footsteps running around, a sinking feeling washed over her. She stepped to the window, her eyes scanning the empty yard, but Faye was nowhere to be found. At first, it seemed like a simple mistake. Maybe Faye had wandered off, gone to a friend's house, or was playing in the backyard. But as the minutes ticked by, the worry in Selena's chest began to grow. She called out again, louder this time, "Faye?" But no answer came. Her first instinct was to check the house, but the familiar places she searched offered no sign of Faye. Panic began to settle in. What if she hadn't just wandered off? What if something more had happened? She ran through the neighborhood, asking neighbors if they had seen her daughter, even calling local stores. But nothing. The minutes turned into hours, but still, there was no sign of Faye. The neighborhood, once filled with children's laughter, was now eerily quiet. The street lights flickered on as night began to fall, but Faye still hadn't returned home. As the night wore on, a growing sense of dread took hold. Where was Faye? By 9 p.m., the authorities were called in, and the search for Faye began in earnest. Local law enforcement, the FBI, and volunteers joined the effort, but the hours stretched long, and still, there was no trace of Faye. Police canvassed the neighborhood, asking everyone if they had seen anything unusual that afternoon. But everyone said the same thing, nothing out of the ordinary. She had just disappeared. For Faye's mother, Selena, each day without news weighed heavier than the last. Her heart ached, and every time the phone rang, a brief spark of hope flickered before being replaced by crushing disappointment. As the sun dipped below the horizon each day, it felt as though darkness was not only swallowing the sky but consuming her entire world. As the search expanded, the question loomed larger: how could a child just vanish in broad daylight? How could Faye, so full of life, be gone, and no one saw a thing? No clues. No evidence. Just silence. The police had nothing. The community had nothing. Only fear, and the question, what happened to Faye? Days passed, and the hope of finding Faye alive began to fade. But just when it seemed like the answers might never come, a discovery was made, one that would change the course of the investigation forever. And with it, the first real clue to what had happened to Faye. It wasn't until February 13, 2020, that the investigators finally received the breakthrough they so desperately needed. Early that morning, as the search continued in earnest, a breakthrough came when Faye's lifeless body was discovered in a shallow grave in the woods behind her own home. It was mere yards away from the yard where she had been playing just days before. The place where her laughter should have echoed in the warm afternoon air had now become the scene of an unfathomable tragedy. The grave was shallow, and Faye's body had been concealed under a layer of dark potting soil so similar to what had been bought just hours earlier. At first, investigators couldn't comprehend the magnitude of what they were seeing. They had hoped against hope that they would find Faye alive, but now, standing at the edge of the woods, the hard reality set in. The autopsy results revealed the heartbreaking truth: Faye had been suffocated. Her life had been violently stolen, taken far too soon. But the cause of death raised more questions than it answered, questions that would send the investigation into a darker and more unsettling direction. Who could commit such a horrendous act? And why was a child, so full of life and joy, taken in such a way? Selena had already been holding on to the belief that Faye could be out there somewhere, hidden or lost. But now, she faced a new nightmare. Her worst fear had come true. The reality of her daughter's fate was sealed, and the investigation had reached a critical turning point. The community, already reeling from Faye's disappearance, was shaken to its core. The question now wasn't how Faye had disappeared, it was who could have done this to her and why. And just as importantly, why had the perpetrator hidden her so close to home? The discovery of the body was only the beginning of the investigation, and yet, every clue seemed to raise even more unsettling questions. What drove someone to commit such an act so close to home? What did the grave and its contents reveal about the mind of the person responsible? The days that followed brought new leads, each more troubling than the last. Surveillance footage, witness statements, and physical evidence all pointed toward one person, a man named Cody Scott Taylor, a 30-year-old neighbor. Taylor lived just 500 feet from Faye's home and had been observed acting suspiciously around the time of her disappearance. At first, Taylor seemed like just another face in the crowd, someone who could have easily blended in with the quiet neighborhood. But as investigators dug deeper, their findings made it increasingly clear that Cody Taylor was more than just an innocent bystander. Cody's movements had been suspiciously close to Faye's disappearance. Surveillance footage taken from nearby cameras showed Taylor at a local Walmart on February 13th, around 7:10 a.m., purchasing potting soil, the same type of soil found covering Faye's body. That morning, Taylor had been seen walking in and out of his apartment complex with a bag that appeared to contain the same soil. For the investigators, this was the first concrete connection to the crime, but it also left them questioning, how could Cody, a man with no criminal history, be connected to something so horrific? What was his involvement, and why had he been so close to the crime scene? How could a man, seemingly ordinary, be involved in something as horrific as this? What drove Cody to make such a choice, and why was he near the scene during those crucial moments? With each new piece of evidence, the suspicion surrounding Taylor deepened. Witnesses reported seeing him near the Swetlik home walking around like Smeon looking for something on the day Faye disappeared, and yet, when questioned, Taylor claimed he had no idea what had happened. His story seemed rehearsed, full of inconsistencies, and his movements that day were becoming harder to explain. As the investigators dug deeper, they found further contradictions in his statements, especially regarding his whereabouts during the time Faye went missing. The investigation took a darker turn when officers discovered more concrete evidence. Among the disturbing items found at Taylor's home was one of Faye's rain boots, as well as a ladle with fresh dirt still clinging to it. Additionally, DNA evidence collected from both Taylor and Faye confirmed their connection. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but each discovery only led to more questions. A roommate of Taylor's described him as a loner with a negative outlook on life. The roommate recalled that Taylor often kept his bedroom door locked and would spray air freshener around the house during the period of Faye's disappearance, initially thought to mask the smell of marijuana. Upon reflection, the roommate believed the air freshener might have been used to conceal other odors. Taylor's behavior, including his reluctance to engage with neighbors even during the search and his secretive nature, raised further suspicions. He was becoming more erratic, and his attempts to cover up his involvement were becoming more apparent. Why had he lied so consistently about his actions? What could he possibly be hiding? Just when investigators thought they were closing in on the truth, Cody Scott Taylor took his own life. The discovery of his body was met with shock, disbelief, and a deep sense of unfinished business. The man who had seemed to be the key to unlocking the mystery of Faye's death was now gone. His suicide was both a tragic and ironic twist. Just as the investigators were on the verge of making an arrest, the answers they had hoped for seemed to disappear with him. Had Cody known that he was too far gone, too consumed by his own obsession, to face the consequences? Did he end his life because he feared the truth would come to light, or did he believe that death was the only escape from his guilt? The community, which had been bracing itself for closure, was left in turmoil. Faye's family, who had waited for justice, now faced a new nightmare. Without Taylor's testimony or a confrontation, the true depth of his motives would remain forever obscured. The search for the truth was not over, it had only taken a darker turn. What had truly happened to Faye Swetlik? Was Cody Scott Taylor the only one involved, or did others play a part? And if Taylor was the mastermind, what pushed him to take such a violent turn? With his death, will the truth ever come to light, or will the mystery of Faye's death remain unsolved forever? To understand the complexities of Cody's actions, we must first look at his past. Cody's history was not marked by violence, but it was marked by isolation and frustration. He had no significant criminal record, no public outbursts, no indication that he was capable of such an act. But beneath the surface, Cody's life was full of unresolved frustration that festered in the shadows of his mind. Cody Scott Taylor had lived a life that seemed outwardly ordinary. He had graduated from Bluffton High School, attended college for a brief time, and worked at local restaurants. Growing up, Cody had struggled with building meaningful relationships. Whether through personal failure, perceived slights, or a general inability to connect with others, he had always been an outsider. His social circles were small, and his attempts at forming lasting friendships seemed to fizzle out. By the time he reached adulthood, Cody was isolated, alone in a world that felt indifferent to him. Neighbors described him as someone who kept to himself. He wasn't unfriendly, but he was distant. His interactions with others were often polite but lacking warmth, and he seemed unable to forge deep connections with people. There was always something about Cody's manner that made others uneasy, though they couldn't quite place it. He would offer help without being asked, linger too long in conversations, or act overly eager to make a connection, but then withdraw just as quickly. This isolation bred resentment in Cody, a resentment that would later shape his twisted sense of entitlement. He had been unable to form a fulfilling relationship with a woman, and his loneliness fueled his bitterness. This resentment was not just towards women, but towards life itself. As he watched those around him succeed in their relationships, his feelings of inadequacy deepened. Could Cody's isolation have played a role in his eventual act of violence? How much of his frustration with the world around him was internalized and built up over the years? As investigators dug deeper into Cody's life, they found something that would raise even more alarm: his online activity. Although Cody had seemed unremarkable in person, his digital life told a much different story. Through social media, forums, and other online platforms, Cody's frustrations were laid bare for all to see. He was active in communities that harbored deeply misogynistic views, groups that vilified women and blamed them for the perceived failures in his life. His online persona was filled with bitterness, with Cody expressing his anger towards women who he felt had rejected him. He participated in forums where he vented his frustration, seeing women as obstacles to his happiness and success. This virtual world became an outlet for his growing resentment, a place where he could express the anger that he could never voice in real life. One of the most disturbing aspects of Cody's online activity was his obsession with what he saw as unreachable women. He had an unspoken belief that women owed him their attention, their affection, and that they were somehow to blame for his lack of personal success. In hindsight, it's clear that Cody's obsession with these women, and with Faye, was more than just frustration. It was the manifestation of deep-seated emotional issues that had been building for years. As the investigation unfolded, it became evident that these online frustrations may have been the catalyst for his actions. His virtual life had allowed him to develop an unhealthy fixation, and when he saw Faye, so full of life, so carefree, it may have triggered something within him. Could Cody's online persona have been a safe space for him to express his true self, or did it push him further into a state of delusion? Was this fixation on women something that led to the moment of violence? Experts suggest that individuals like Cody, seemingly ordinary people without any prior criminal record, often harbor suppressed tendencies that eventually boil over in a moment of violence. The slow, steady buildup of unmet emotional needs, a distorted perception of relationships, and a profound sense of entitlement can push a person to commit horrific acts, especially when the person feels that society or certain individuals owe them something they can't have. Taylor's life had been marked by a series of frustrations, personal, social, and emotional. He was unable to establish meaningful relationships, and as the years passed, the growing isolation led him to cultivate a toxic obsession with women. Cody's fixation on Faye, though seemingly inexplicable to the outside world, was not an isolated event but rather the culmination of years of frustration and warped thinking. His sense of entitlement and the deep-seated belief that he was owed something, attention, affection, or even power, had reached its breaking point. But why Faye? Why had Cody targeted such a young, innocent child? What had triggered his obsession with her? Was it a moment of opportunity, or had Cody been planning this for some time? Why Faye, and not another woman? While the investigation didn't uncover a direct relationship between Taylor and the Swetlik family, it was clear that Faye represented something that had long been out of Cody's reach. A figure of innocence, untainted by the bitterness and resentment that had poisoned his mind. Faye became a symbol, the object of his delusion, a manifestation of his unspoken rage. The discovery of Cody's journal was the key to understanding his mind. Inside the pages of the journal, investigators found entries that described a deepening obsession with women, and Faye in particular. His writings were filled with frustration, loneliness, and anger, emotions he had struggled to express outwardly for years. The journal revealed that Faye wasn't just an innocent child to Cody, she was a symbol of something unattainable, something he believed had been denied to him. The journal also revealed a pattern of escalating behavior. What seemed like random thoughts and frustrations were, in fact, signs of a man who was increasingly consumed by his rage. His obsession with Faye, which began as a fixation on her innocence, slowly morphed into something much darker, the belief that he was entitled to her attention, her life, and, ultimately, her death. The contents of the journal painted a horrifying picture of a man who had long been struggling with his own demons. His writings suggested that he had carefully planned his interactions with Faye and had been fixated on her long before the tragic events of February 2020. The act of violence he committed was the culmination of years of frustration and pent-up rage. Inside Taylor's home, investigators found a hidden room, a space that had been kept under lock and key, where he stored his most personal items. Among the belongings were photographs of Faye, images taken without her knowledge, and a collection of objects that seemed to symbolize his twisted feelings. These discoveries painted a portrait of a man who had crossed the line from admiration to obsession, his unhealthy fixation growing deeper with time. Yet, as authorities began to connect the dots, one question remained: what had driven him to this extreme act? Was it just the culmination of his frustrations, or was there something more at play, something that no one could have seen coming? Was his journal the last piece of the puzzle, or did it merely confirm something that had been festering inside him for far too long? As we search for the final pieces of this chilling puzzle, we are left to grapple with the dark reality of human nature. Sometimes, the most ordinary-seeming people can harbor the most horrifying secrets. The truth about Faye's death may never be fully known, but the search for answers continues as we explore the twisted depths of this tragedy. Could there be other truths hidden in plain sight? The investigation may be over, but are the real answers yet to come? For Selena Collins Swetlik, the pain of losing her daughter was unbearable. A mother's love is supposed to protect, to shield her child from the horrors of the world. But when that safety is ripped away in an instant, nothing in the world can prepare you for the heartbreak that follows. No words, no gesture, no support could ever fill the hollow space that Faye's death had left in her heart. The weight of her grief is evident in her posture, in the tear-streaked face she hides behind her hands. The memories of Faye, the giggles, the late-night talks, the shared smiles, feel like distant echoes. In the empty quiet of the room, Selena Collins is surrounded by all that remains of her daughter: a stuffed bunny abandoned on the couch, a tiny pair of shoes by the door, a bowl of half-eaten cereal left untouched. How does a mother carry on when everything around her feels lost? What piece of herself can Selena Collins ever reclaim from the wreckage of her grief? And will she ever find peace in her heart again, or is this emptiness the new reality? The community's overwhelming support was constant, though. Amid the crushing pain, Selena Collins found strength in the gestures of others: neighbors bringing over meals, friends offering quiet comfort, and strangers showing up with flowers and words of condolence. The town of Casey, her home, became a place of shared grief, with every person offering what they could: comfort, assistance, and most importantly, their collective sorrow. It was as if they had all lost a piece of themselves. They were no longer just a group of neighbors, they had become a family, bound by the tragedy that had struck too close to home. Can the comfort of others truly ease the pain of a loss this deep? How does a community find the strength to stand together in the face of such unthinkable sorrow? As the days passed, the grief of the community shifted. What once felt like a distant tragedy, something happening to someone else, became their shared reality. The people of Casey, though mourning the loss of Faye, also recognized that they were mourning the loss of their own innocence. Faye was more than just a child, she was a symbol of innocence, a reminder of how fragile life truly is. Her death was not just the loss of a daughter, but the loss of a sense of security, of knowing that you are safe within your own neighborhood. The community stood united, offering a collective strength that Selena Collins would cling to during her darkest moments. But in that unity, there was also the cold, hard truth: nothing in the world could undo what had been done. Can the community ever truly heal when the trust they once had in their surroundings has been shattered? Will they ever feel safe again, knowing that something so violent could happen so close to home? For the tight-knit neighborhood of Churchill Heights, the death of Faye Swetlik was a moment of deep reckoning. It wasn't just the loss of a little girl, it was the loss of trust, the sudden, jarring reminder that the people we live next to, the ones we trust, can sometimes harbor secrets we could never imagine. The familiar faces, once so comforting, now seemed tainted. How could someone from within their own community, someone they had known, someone they had waved at in passing, be capable of such an unspeakable act? The investigation had revealed deep, unsettling truths about the community they had trusted, forcing everyone to reconsider what it meant to be safe. Were there signs that the community missed? Could they have prevented what happened? Or was this tragedy inevitable, regardless of how well they knew their neighbors? In the wake of Faye's death, the once familiar streets of Casey felt different. Where children had once played without fear, the silence of the neighborhood now felt thick with uncertainty. Neighbors began to question what they had missed, what signs they had overlooked. How could something like this happen right next door? Were they blind to the darkness lurking in their midst? Was there a predator living among them, hiding in plain sight? The investigation had left the community unsettled, and questions filled the air like a heavy fog. Had they been too trusting? Could they have seen the warning signs? As they mourned Faye, they began to realize that their own sense of safety had been shattered. The question was no longer just about who had done this, it was about how they had allowed such an act to happen without seeing it coming. For Selena Collins, the grief was unrelenting. The house, once filled with the sound of her daughter's laughter, now echoed with her absence. The questions, too, were endless. What had she missed in those moments of normalcy? What could she have done to protect her daughter? Was there anything she could have done differently? The weight of guilt was a constant companion, following her every step, but through it all, she clung to the love she had for Faye. Her daughter's spirit would live on in the hearts of those who loved her. Could Selena Collins have done something more to protect her daughter? Was there a sign, a moment, that could have changed everything? The grief that had swept over the town of Casey slowly morphed into something more profound, a shared resolve. The people of the town knew that while they couldn't bring Faye back, they could honor her memory in the best way they knew how, by coming together. By protecting their children. By ensuring that no one else would have to endure the same pain that Selena Collins had. In the midst of their pain, they found purpose, a sense of duty to prevent another tragedy from happening in their quiet town. In the days and weeks that followed, the community became a collective force for change, rallying around the Swetlik family. School programs were created to raise awareness about child safety, and the town held vigils to honor Faye's life and remember her as the symbol of innocence she had been. But the question remained, how would this small town, shattered by such a senseless act, move forward from here? What can a community truly do in the aftermath of such a loss? Is there a way to heal without forgetting the tragedy that brought them together? For Selena Collins, there was no moving on, only moving forward. The loss of Faye was something that would never leave her, but it became clear to her that the only way to cope was to live her life in honor of her daughter. In the quiet moments when grief would overtake her, she would think of Faye's smile, her laughter, her innocence. And in those moments, she found a sliver of peace. The loss of Faye Swetlik was felt by every soul in Casey. But the scars left behind ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. In the aftermath of tragedy, how do you find a way to heal, to move forward, and to ensure that such a senseless act is never repeated? These questions would linger in the minds of the community for years to come. Can a community ever fully heal after such a loss, or will the scars remain forever? But even as the community began to heal, the questions remained. Could they truly feel safe again? Could they trust their neighbors? Or had the events of Faye's death forever altered the fabric of their town, leaving an indelible mark that could never be erased. What will it take for the community to reclaim their sense of safety? And how much of their innocence will they lose in the process? Your voice matters in the fight to protect our children. If this case has touched you, join the conversation on how we can prevent tragedies like this from happening again. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Together, we can raise awareness and work towards safer communities. Child safety is something we all can help with. Learn how you can get involved with local initiatives and organizations that focus on protecting children. Support child protection programs, and help make sure tragedies like this never occur again. Every voice counts. Together, we can create a safer world for our children. Let's continue standing up for them, so Faye's story, and others like hers, are never forgotten. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update on cases like Faye's. Stay safe at all cost.